We're now moving to the regulatory perspective. Robert, please.
So thank you. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to make a few comments. And I'd start off by saying that I think Brandy and Lynn have done a very nice job of setting the stage and outlining many of the key issues and problems. FDA is largely a consumer of these data. So that's the perspective that I'm going to try to provide, mostly from our experience in post-marketing drug safety. So one of the, and you'll hear me echoing many of the things that Brandy and Lynn have said. I think one of the key starting points for all this is what is the question of interest. So drug safety is where we have our most experience using real-world data. The Cures Act requires us to come up with a framework for new indications for already approved products. And that is a relatively narrow set of questions and really drives a relatively narrow set of data issues, but helps also focus that. The other key aspect of being a consumer at a regulatory agency is that there's a large volume of these studies that we either see or do ourselves. So there has to be a very systematic and efficient process for quality assessment. So the guidelines that are written here are kind of a high-level approach and cover many of the key topics, but they really have to be systematized and put into a process, a kind of industrial process. And I'll talk a little bit about what we've done in Sentinel with respect to that. So what has been our general approach? So we put out a guidance document in 2013 to describe many of the issues really that Randy and Lynn covered and that we're discussing now about how to use healthcare data, electronic healthcare data for post-market drug safety studies. And it provides a fairly detailed discussion of many of the issues. On a more operational level, over the last 2 years in Sentinel, we have implemented what we refer to as the ARIA system, or the System of Active Risk Identification and Analysis. And the enabling law, FDAA 2007, requires us to do what's called a sufficiency analysis before we can require that we ask a sponsor to do a study. So we've now done in 2 years about 100 or so of these sufficiency analyses for particular drug adverse event outcomes. And the sufficiency analysis really asks a couple of high-level questions. Is the data there? Exposures, outcomes, confounders. Are the methods and tools available? Can it be done with sufficient precision to answer the question of interest? So with respect to our overall assessment, we have found about 50% of the questions that we have, the safety questions that we've been confronted with, can be addressed in this ARIA component of Sentinel. Now, ARIA consists of the data that's in the common data model plus the tool, so it's not the full capabilities of the system, but it gets to this point of having an industrial process and how that can be implemented and how it can work. Then it also helps us to focus where we make our investments to improve the where there's missing data or missing algorithms or whatever the case may be. So with respect to this Sentinel, one of the key aspects of it is that the Sentinel Common Data Model contains the most granular elements that are needed to make these assessments. And the data curation and the QC occurs at the data partners, but with an agreed upon centralized approach and software, centralized software that helps make this an efficient and standardized and consistent process. But I think, as Lynn was pointing out, it's very important for us as users really to have access to the people who know the data, because each data system is a little bit different, and while we can standardize that as much as possible, if a problem arises, you have to go back to the data owner. Probably the biggest unresolved issue, I would say, is the missing data issue. And that can be addressed in some cases in the data linkage or data collection as was outlined, but I think it's going to be a problem because we're not going to solve this problem 100% and may need to adapt or develop new approaches, particularly statistical approaches, to address that issue. And another big issue that we've been trying to focus on is this aspect of the validation of the data. In terms of the clinical concepts that we're trying to address, and particularly outcomes. So just to put in a little plug where Duke Margolis is helping us in this, next week there's a webinar where we'll be discussing the problems that we found in this sufficiency analysis and the approach we're going to take to try to address it for outcomes. But a high-level sort of view here is that these have traditionally been research activities where we rely on the medical record as the source of truth. And we get human experts to go say this is a case of anaphylaxis, for example. And then another set of human experts will identify the codes to combine in an algorithm, and it will make an assessment of how well the algorithm identifies the cases. So this is a slow and inefficient process, and it's very costly. So we're looking for ways to how to improve that. And looking at things like natural language processing and machine learning technologies. But I think one of the key things that we've already started learning, and we'll learn even more here, is that as we do this, as we try to create standardized approaches, we'll find that some of the things that we thought were true as experts probably aren't true, and we take a more data-driven approach, will hopefully improve this whole process. So I guess I'll stop there and look forward to
Thank you very much.